Welcome to the Russ Joy Show. I'm Russ Joy. You knew that because you're smart, and it's also the name of the show. And as you may see, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm now experimenting with new tech in the office, in the home setup. Prime Day was a great day. I got better lighting, although I'm still working at the kinks. Is that why I was late today? You bet your bottom dollar it was. Russ, couldn't you have done that last night? Sure could have, but I value the time I get to spend it in the evening with my wife after the kids go to bed. And so, unfortunately, you, the listener, the viewer, you're very important to me. You're not as important as my wife. Sorry. If that offends you, I apologize on a beautiful Tuesday where it is not just a normal Tuesday. It's a training camp Tuesday. That's right. Your team, your town, your Philadelphia Eagles are back at it today, baby. Getting all the hype, getting everybody excited about football in the Delaware Valley, getting arguably the best team in the NFC back out on the field. Sort of. Camp opens today. First practice is actually tomorrow. I think the walkthroughs are tomorrow. But the camp opens today. Now, you may be waxing poetic. You may, when training camp comes around, you may think to yourself, hey, I remember there was a time my father and my father's father before him, they used to go to the Lehigh Valley. There we would find Andy of the House Reed and the rest of his players, the men who had pledged their fealty to him, and we would watch as they would go to battle on the gridiron and then go back to the dorm rooms because Andrew of the House Reed believed that would build camaraderie. And maybe that is you. Like maybe you do have some great story about being taken to Lehigh Valley as a kid and you miss those Lehigh Valley training camp days and you think that the fact that they do it at NovaCare is a cop-out and that it's a shame that it's not as open to the public as it once was. And maybe you feel like that. Maybe you don't. Let me know in the comments. But I didn't go to training camp as a kid. That wasn't something that was readily available to me. Although I think I've said this on the show before. As a sports fan, I didn't really start to enjoy sports until somewhere around middle school. And my parents were decidedly not sports fans. So there was also no history to my recollection. I'm going to ask my dad. I don't think he'll remember. But I don't think there was any kind of real history with my parents of them being taken to training camp or them being taken to games or anything like that. So training camp wasn't something that was really of interest to me. I do remember once I did fall in love with sports that I thought it was really cool that the Eagles would go to training camp and that they would stay in the dorms together. And it's interesting because if you think about it, right, like let's take the current version of the players and player empowerment movements and everything out of things, right? The entire concept of taking guys, putting them back into the dorms, almost giving them a second chance to live at least that version of the college lifestyle, you can see how it would build some kind of team chemistry. You could see how it would potentially get these guys who especially are new to the team, draft picks, undrafted free agent signings, that bringing them together and almost not forcing their hand, but in a sense, forcing them to be with their new teammates kind of helps them assimilate into the culture of the team a little bit better. Now, those days have long passed, and some people are very anti what has happened in the years since. But no matter where you land and no matter how you feel, there is something cool and there is a new energy in this area because training camp is back. And while the Phillies had kind of gone through a couple of rough series, which we will probably get to at some point in today's show, there is a real excitement about what the Eagles are going to be. And in fairness, a month or two ago, when we looked at what would the summer look like, if we go back to April and we said, hey, what will the summer look like? Philadelphia Union fans felt really good about their team, even though they were running it back after running it back. Phillies fans felt quite good about their team, acknowledging that there were still some holes and that they hadn't necessarily added 6 amazing pieces to get a team up and over the hump into a World Series, but they still felt good about it. I don't think anybody expected this Phillies team to go on the kind of run that they have to this point in the season. So most people kind of had today circled on their calendar. Hey, best case scenario, Union are good, the Phillies are good. Training camp! Let's do this! Training camp's finally here. Let me know in the comments, though. I want to know if you get as excited about training camp as some other people do. Now, I do think that this is, and maybe it's a change of times, right? Like maybe this is just because I'm getting old. I'm really not 33, but I feel old. I feel internally old. It's probably having 4 kids, but I feel a little bit old. And part of me that feels old is I keep going back to, hey, Comcast Sportsnet when it was in town. Like, I actively went out of my way to watch Sports Rise, even though I would watch many of the same interviews. I'd watch it for a full hour, right? Because you would usually catch the last 10 minutes of the episode before, and then you'd stick around for Sports Rise to catch the beginning part as Ron Burke would welcome you into your, you'd welcome him into your home, or he would start to break things down for you, or Neil Hartman, and then you would catch up to the point that you had watched where you caught it in the last 10 minutes, but you would keep watching because you felt like you owed it to those hosts to finish out the show. But you remember what those training camp reports were like, and then you would go off to school, you'd go off to work or whatever, and you'd come home and you'd watch Daily News Live, and then you would feel like you were really kind of embedded in what training camp was, because they would bring reporters on who would tell you the biggest stories of the day and all the biggest developments. And you didn't have Twitter giving you the play-by-play of Jalen Hurts misses a throw, or that ball hit Greg Ward in the hands and he dropped it. He's up to 6 drops through the first 3 practices of training camp. You didn't have that. So it was almost more of a whisper down the lane. It was a little bit more of, I don't know, maybe it was the feeling of being told a story, right? Like a word of mouth story. And that maybe is what we've kind of lost with the advent of Twitter, which in fairness, like you could look at this a whole bunch of different ways. I think that there is something really cool about the fact that you do have reporters who go down, and the TV stations and the radio stations, or at least WIP, goes down and they'll capture some video, they'll capture some pictures, they'll give you the blow by blow. But I do think that it's kind of removed a lot of the emotion. It's removed a lot of the aura around training camp. But I'm going to go over to the comments really quick before we continue. Andrew Fawcett checks in with a good morning. Good morning, Andrew. Hope you're doing well. He also notes Matvei Michkov and Eagles training camp. How can anything get better? Oh, the Phillies are the best team in baseball. Andrew, I love the positivity this morning. What better way to start the day with a little bit of positivity? Nico says good morning, and that he was too young for Lehigh Valley. Sean C. says it's funny to see the same people who cried, enjoy what's happening with the Phillies, living and dying with each pitch right now and overreacting to everything. This is a great evaluation period. We'll get there in a little bit. BJ Beretta, never went to Lehigh Valley. I went to Flyers practices at Voorhees all the time as a kid. Easier to get to and more juice with the Lindros era Flyers. Ford is also here. Ford has some thoughts on the Phillies. We'll save those for when we get to the Phillies section of the show. A lot of comments about the Phillies. Okay, I like this. This is good. Andrew says that me saying he's old, me saying that I'm old, it's like him saying that he's young. Andrew, I've met you. You're not an old man. Not an old man at all. Let's see if there's anything else on the Eagles. No, there's stuff about the Union, stuff about the Phillies. We'll get to those in a little bit. Now, one thing that I kind of posited, a thing that I threw into the description of the episode and that I added to the thumbnail of the episode for those of you who really like to dive into those things, a little bit of foreshadowing. The thing that I keep coming back to is, what exactly are we supposed to expect of the Philadelphia Eagles in training camp and going into the season? Legitimately, what do you expect? And maybe even more importantly, who do you expect to have a good camp? And who does it matter? Who does this matter the most for? Like, you always come back to the draft picks. Obviously, it's important that the draft picks have a good draft or have a good camp, because for some of them, you're a highly picked player. You're a first, a second round pick. It's expected of you by not only the organization but by the fan base as a whole that you are going to make the team and that you're going to be an impact player. But for those later round draft picks, you're on a little bit of tenuous footing. You're not necessarily guaranteed a position on the team. You're not exactly guaranteed a spot. With a rebuilding team, you might be, but with a team that has the kind of Super Bowl aspirations that this one does, oh, nay. You don't get the benefit of the doubt. So every draft pick that this team has is expected to come in and make a difference from day one, or run the risk of being left on the outside looking in. Now, obviously, the simple one here, the simple answer to the question of who needs to have a good camp, where Sports Talk Radio will take it at least, is Jalen Hurts has to have a very good camp. And realistically, does he? No. There's no legitimate competition for the starting quarterback job on this team. There's no reason that he has to go out and prove anything. Again, 2 years ago, the man was the runner-up for MVP. Had he not gotten hurt, he probably would have been named league MVP. He was one fumble returned for a touchdown away from potentially being a Super Bowl champion quarterback. No, he doesn't have a lot to prove. And we know that the weapons that he has around him will also likely mitigate any potential regression that people may have feared is permanent based on last year's performance, which again, I go back to injuries, but fine. I don't see Jalen Hurts having to go out and blow anyone's doors off in camp. I expect him to be sharp. I do expect him this season to have a chip on his shoulder. I am a little bit more hopeful, I guess, that a lot of the rumors that were kind of surrounding him last year and that have kind of leaked out over the last few months about maybe there being some questions about his leadership in the locker room and whether or not the moment got too big for him, whether or not the endorsements inflated his ego, all that kind of stuff. And that maybe there may have been something that makes you think the guy who's presenting a very humble sort of front to the camera might not be the same guy in the locker room. I hope that all those things get put to rest this year, truly, because if they don't, that's a whole other issue. That's a legitimate problem that this team is going to have to somehow overcome. But in terms of his ability and in terms of what he needs to do in camp this year, totally different. He doesn't have to prove. I'd say the same thing about A.J. Brown. I'd say the same thing about Devontae Smith. I'd say the same thing about Saquon Barkley. All of your weapons, and Dallas Goedert, those guys don't have anything to prove. Their spots on this roster are locked in. They are going to be impact players for you this year. There is a place that I'm looking at, and we'll get back to it in a second, because to me, it's the most important position for this team to have legitimate confidence in going into the season. But before we do, I'm going to go back over to the comments. I'm going to take a sip of coffee because I realized that the last couple of weeks, I talk for a while, and then I'm afraid to take a sip because I don't have somebody to go to, and I can't yell at intern Andrew or video guy Craig. All right, so let's take a look back over at the comments. Nico thinks that the only thing that the Eagles have to prove is that they don't start 0-2. Sean C. says, training camp is terrible now. I can't stand the barrage of play-by-play tweets from all the beats regarding 11 on 11 play. We'll get back to that because I 100% agree with that. Andrew thinks that's fair. Sean thinks that the starters need to play a quarter total across the preseason. As in, like, play one quarter, 15 minutes of football the entire preseason? Gabe Kapler would enjoy that. Hashtag be bold. Andrew thinks that he hopes that Hurts is going to run a little less this year with Barkley coming in. BJ says, if Hurts doesn't say the exact right things about Nick in interviews, talk radio will continue to explode. Manufacture drama because the wide receiver 3 battle is not as sexy. And therein lies part of the problem. And this is actually where I get really excited about doing this show. Because as I said at the onset, and as I said in the trailer for the show, and the announcement for the show, we all know, I believe at this point, that when it comes to media in this city, I love holding the media accountable in this city as it pertains to Philly sports. I love it. I love to call out bullshit when I see it, and when I hear it, and when I read it. And I will invite those people onto the show where they can come and they can defend their take, or they can come and defend a hit piece. Because we all know that there are probably 2 columnists in the city right now who are trying to figure out their hit pieces for later in training camp and even into preseason. That if this team struggles or if somebody's not as sharp as expected, they are already sharpening the proverbial knives, or I guess in this case, the pencil, the keyboard. Anyway, you get it. Now, my problem is that when I do Crossing broadcast on Mondays and Thursdays, that they didn't do it yesterday, one of the things that I run into is Crossing Broad has this thing now that didn't used to be in place, but it's a little bit of you can't go quite as hard after members of the media because, in fairness, media tend to be sources for other media. Media members can tend to be sources for things about the companies they work for or about what they're hearing in the industry. I genuinely don't give a damn. So on this show, you'll get the 100% unfiltered opinion of what I think of what I see, what I hear, what I read. So buckle up, Buttercup, because it's going to get intense. Now, one thing that I do want to get back to is Sean's point about training camp and what makes it kind of unbearable. And what I would argue probably makes training camp pretty unbearable for a lot of you. Like, if we look back at the early 2000s, let's call it the early 2000s, what was training camp for the Eagles? The players went off to Lehigh Valley. They stayed in dorms. You would hear these stories of training camp fights and about this massive pilgrimage that people would take to go watch the players. And then you would get those stories on Daily News Live hours later, where you would have some of the best writers in the city waxing poetic about what they saw and making it sound like a modern version of a future story that'll be told for generations. Now, you don't have Lehigh Valley. Now you don't have that massive pilgrimage. You don't have that same sort of connection. And now, instead of having to wait a few hours and be told about training camp through the lens of people with great creative minds, great journalistic minds, instead, you get play-by-play for every play on Twitter. And that is probably the biggest issue that many people have with what training camp is now. I don't get excited about training camp, not because I went there as a kid, which I didn't, and not because I plan on taking my kids there, which I really don't. No, my problem is seeing the play-by-play in my feed nonstop from the time camp starts until the time camp ends takes a lot of the fun out of it. Seeing Jalen Hurts misses a 7-yard pass over the middle. Saquon Barkley fumbles the ball. Dallas Goedert, pass hits his hands. That's his second drop in 4 days. I don't care about any of that. Why would I? Like, I don't want play-by-play at Sixers training camp.
Joel Embiid went 5 of 8 from downtown. Joel Embiid missed a free throw. Could that signal an issue going forward? If he loses confidence at the free throw line, will his true shooting percentage drop by 1.2% this year?
I don't expect that in the Sixers practice. Why the hell would I want it in the Eagles practice? When I've gone down and covered the Flyers at training camp, right? You try to catch a little video. You try to put out a tweet once in a while that kind of, I go back to, I think there was a video I put out a few years ago of Nolan Patrick taking a shootout attempt against Carter Hart. And he had a really great move. So I tweeted that out, and I put that out to the people because training camp for the Flyers isn't televised. There were some people in attendance, but I think at that point a lot of people had left. Also, it was a very bad team, or was expected to be a bad team, and it ended up being a bad team. But also because, like, that's a cool moment. Like, that's one thing that you get to see, like, after a practice. But I certainly wasn't sitting there, like, taking copious notes and putting them out play-by-play about everything the Flyers were doing to tweak their power play, right? Because nobody cares. And the people that do care, I guess I shouldn't say nobody. Dealing in absolutes, not always the best thing. But, like, the amount of people who actually do care about it, it's so few and far between. You're talking to a niche of a niche of a niche instead of trying to do something that benefits all the fans or as many of the fans as you possibly can. I absolutely hate having the play-by-play because what ends up happening is I follow, let's say, 6 or 7 of the beat guys and a few of the radio people. And where I'm just kind of scrolling Twitter just to get away from it all for a little bit, I start getting an entire feed full of Jalen Hurts misses a pass. The ball hit Dallas Goedert in the hands, popped up in the air, was taken back the other way by Avonte Maddox. Avonte Maddox took 7 steps in order to get to the end zone. Is that a concern? Is his stride not as long as it once was? Like, I don't like that stuff. I don't care about that stuff. Maybe you do. I'm going to go over to the comments, though, because, again, this show is about you as much as it is about me. Andrew Fawcett thinks that What those guys are doing down there, what those men and women are doing, is stirring the drama pot. You could be right. Ford also points out that I am in the media, yes, and I'm critical of myself. For what it's worth, I'm critical of myself. And when I make a real big mistake, I'll let you know. Like some people think that I made a big mistake with the tweet that I put out a couple days ago. We'll get to that later in the non-sports part of the show, because that's what I do. Now, Ford thinks that I'm looking more at the people who are talking heads with hot takes that make shit up. There are some of those. We all know that there are some of those. Some of those people have prominent roles, and I still don't know how they got those jobs or why they keep them, because they're not particularly great at what they do. And yet here we are. The only voice that mattered back then was Ray Didinger's, says Andrew Fawcett. Yeah, that was entirely different. Those were the days. I'm trying to think, like the Ray Didingers of the world, you'd have the Dick Girardis of the world, you'd have the Ed Barkowitzes of the world, you'd have Sam Dinellen and Les Bowen and older Rich Hoffman, Phil Jasner. I know he wasn't an Eagles guy, he was a Sixers guy. But like you think back to those days, Stan Hochman, you think back to those days and like there's something about that feels truly nostalgic, and it felt like a totally different version of what it was to cover sports and what it was to dissect sports, which is not where we're at right now. Although in fairness, the guy with probably the highest profile right now in terms of being a writer or a columnist that has a legitimate position somewhere on the radio is Sealski, who's now going to be co-hosting with Rob Ellis. That was the move they made. I think we talked about this a week or two ago about Glenn Macnow retiring, who was going to take that spot. Rob Ellis is going to take Glenn Macnow's spot, host that show with Sealski. So Sealski's got like probably the highest profile thing. I know that Marcus Hayes has done some radio work for WIP. I don't know if he still is or how often he does it. But like you don't have the centralized place anymore for those guys even to really go head to head or to offer up their thoughts and kind of have the we agree on this, we disagree on this sort of panel show like we always used to get with Comcast Sportsnet. I digress. BJ says that I am lowercase m media, broadcasting to a wide audience. Uppercase media is the establishment driven by ad-supported clicks and views to support the big corp. That's right. That's why I like BJ. I owe BJ an email too. BJ, I owe you an email. I'll do that later. I did get it. Now listen, don't get me wrong. I also, as much as I don't like ads, right? We have them on Snow the Goalie because the show is big enough to be able to have ads. And it's a nice little revenue stream for us where I don't have to go shake down mom and pop shops to try to get advertising money. Because candidly, that is the worst part of doing any of this, is having to go out and pound the pavement to go talk to small businesses and try to convince them to support a show. And then a month in, they stiff you. And then you're like, how do I go after this person for this money? And then you just kind of give up. It happened once before. It's very sad. So when you get a show to a point where it's big enough and you can have ads, even though you, the listener or the viewer, might hate them, they are actually kind of beneficial. They'll allow us to do the things we do. Now, I see Seth over on X is asking questions about another team, and we're going to get to that team next. We'll be there in a second. Sean thinks that there should be a legitimate, like you could make a documentary about the rise and fall of Comcast Sportsnet. A damn shame. It is. The second that it flipped from being Comcast Sportsnet to NBC Sports Philly, I think is about where the wheels fell off. Maybe there were some signs that it was starting to fall apart before that. But what remains is a shell of what it once was, which, by the way, isn't a shot at the people who work at the station. Because I think that for the most part, the talent who work at the station are actually quite good. I just think that it feels a little bit more corporate-y, a little bit more of a husk of itself. It doesn't feel like it has the same kind of level of integration and love that it once did. There was a time where Comcast Sportsnet felt like it was a family and that came through the screen. I don't necessarily get that as much now. And you have a Carnival Barker who is the guy in charge of doing your pre and post game for a lot of your biggest games, which actively does take away from what that show is. He's got blue glasses, too. I don't know who the fuck told him to do blue glasses, but here we are. This is where we're at. He was good at a time. Now he's a carnival barker. It's a shame. You hate to see it. What bad things happen to good people? Who knows? JT says, my dad took my brother and I to Westchester and then to Lehigh when I became, which became a trip for my brother and I. Yeah, I forgot about the Westchester days, training camp. Totally forgot about it. That was long before my days at Westchester. Would we advocate for it? All right, drop this in the comments. Where should the Eagles have training camp? If they were going to go to a college campus now, which college campus would it make the most sense for the Eagles to go to? Some people will advocate University of Delaware. I almost guarantee that that's where some would say. I don't think you send them to a city school, right? Like, do you send the Eagles players to Temple? And then it's like, hey, for the guys who are new to the city, this is a good opportunity for you to get a feel for the city. I certainly do not expect the people in the comments to say Villanova, because we're going to end up with the fight of is Villanova a Phillies school or not. Westchester, though, I could advocate for my alma mater. Rammy, right here, with the broken arm. Still need to fix that. Haven't gotten there yet. Anyway, BJ says that social media and Gen Z changed the media. Authenticity drives audience. That's the future. Hashtag truth. Peter comes in over on YouTube, says, trying to enjoy as much of the live show before teaching 8th graders. Love the show, Russ. Thank you, Peter. God bless your soul here for teaching the 8th graders. It's one thing I couldn't do. I coached 6th and 7th graders? 7th and 8th graders? 7th and 8th? 6th, 7th and 8th? It was 7th and 8th. I coached 7th and 8th graders after teaching high school all day. I can't imagine teaching 8th graders. They are. Middle school age kids, that's just not. That is a psychotic bunch to teach. High school kids have their own issues. I could deal with high school. Middle school? No. All right, anyway. Andrew Fawcett thinks that the Eagles should send the team to Penn. Send them to University of Penn. All right, we're going to get off the Eagles now. I feel like some of the momentum of the Eagles talk is dying off. We'll get back to it, though. Don't you worry. Training camp is a long, arduous time, long, arduous process. But I do want to know whether it's in the comments now or after the fact. You could tweet at me at Joy on Broad. Let me know who you think, ultimately, who is it that you're looking for at needing to have a good camp? And I'll touch on this really quick because we'll talk about it on Friday. I think the offensive line is the group that have to prove something in this camp. And it's really not 4 of the guys. It really is who is replacing Jason Kelce at center and how big of a drop-off is the play going to be? Or is there going to be a drop-off? Can you envision a scenario where your guards and your tackles are so damn good that it doesn't matter who your center is? It doesn't take away from Jason Kelce's legacy, by the way. The hot takey people would probably make that argument. I am not a hot take person. We all know that. It's not a hot take if it's the right take. But if the Eagles are able to go out and put a guy in at center who can be successful and where there isn't a massive drop-off from Jason Kelce, then all of a sudden you have found yourself quite the remarkable thing. We'll get there on Friday. I want to talk more about that. All right, now let's get to what other people are very excited about today. And it's not just the Eagles for training camp. No, there is a potential arrival of a Russian player to these United States of America. Not Vladimir Putin. Matvei Michkov. Is he in Philadelphia right now? No. At least from what I've heard, he is not in Philadelphia right now. Is Matvei Michkov on his way to Philadelphia? That is questionable. There is a possibility that he is on his way to Philadelphia right now. Tweet came out on Monday from Kevin Kurtz over at The Athletic saying that Matvei Michkov was expected to be in town, in Philadelphia, or at least in the Philadelphia area, on Tuesday. So obviously people went nuts. They lost their collective mind. Oh my God, Matvei Michkov is here. He's here. Guys, he's here. We are excited. We love Matvei Michkov. I don't know if he's here yet, guys. But I am going to show you why people got themselves so worked up. And in fairness, it's probably at least a somewhat worthwhile thing to be excited about. And that is that Michkov kind of didn't tease the fans. Oh, no, it's gone. Oh, no, there it is. Never mind. I got it. We're good. I'm going to throw you to his Instagram story from Monday, the thing that actually got this tinderbox lit on fire. And here he is, the star of the Philadelphia Flyers, Matvei Michkov. He goes on to Instagram. He posts this to his story. It's about to expire. It's him sitting in a first-class seat. I think that's first class. Is that business class? Is that some other class? I have no idea. That's definitely not coach. I'm about to take a flight in coach, and I'm already panicked about it. Save that for another day. But here's Matvei Michkov. Airplane with the caption, "What's next?" Great question, Matvei. What is next? Why don't you tell the people? Don't hold this out over Flyers fans. Now, in fairness, I think we all know what this means. He's on his way. Now, Matvei Michkov is in a really interesting position, and it's one that I don't think is envious or is enviable. It's not a position that I think I would want to be in. He is already, not quite front and center, but he is already being featured on all of the Flyers' marketing materials going into this season. If you have driven anywhere even remotely close to the general Philadelphia area, you have likely seen the Flyers billboards that feature, I believe it's Couturier, Konechny, and Lawton. I think they have all of the leaders, right, in the front. And then behind them, but in the center, but behind them, is Matvei Michkov. And the caption on the billboard reads something to the effect of, "Welcome to town, Matvei Michkov." That's a lot. A lot of pressure. Matvei Michkov, the best prospect the Flyers have had, probably, or at least the most hyped, since probably Lindros. Is he going to be as good as Lindros? I'm not putting myself out there on that one. Do I think he could be better than Giroux? I think a lot of people could be better than Giroux. I said it again. I don't bow down and pray at the altar of the ginger one. No, I think Matvei Michkov is going to have a really nice career. The Flyers have to hope that he is as good as everyone expects him to be. If Michkov's a flop, which I don't really even want to entertain because I don't think he's going to be, but if Michkov is a flop, it is catastrophic for the Flyers. An absolutely catastrophic development. Why? Because I will come back to last year being such a waste, an absolute waste, where you ended up in hockey purgatory and you ended up having to reach for a guy like Jet Lashenko in the first round of this year's draft. So much of what they are doing is based around this belief that Matvei Michkov is going to be their star of the future and that he's going to come in here. He might not be a super impact player in year one, but that in like year three, he's going to be able to be like a 30-goal guy, that he's going to be able to be a dynamic player, and that ultimately he's going to be the guy who's going to be better at his peak than any Flyers player has been since, like, let's say, peak Giroux. They're different players, entirely different players, but like that same idea that like Michkov is going to develop into being a potential finalist for the Hart Trophy, that like he might end up being a guy that you talk about a decade after he's done playing and you wax poetic about what it was like to watch Matvei Michkov play. But that the entire thing, so much of what the Flyers plan revolves around Michkov being that guy. Boy, oh boy, that is a tough spot to put that kid in. And yet I feel like that's kind of where we're at. And I hope that they're not going to put too much pressure on him. And I think the fans are going to put way too much pressure on Michkov. And I fully expect that there are going to be members of the media who are initially going to give Michkov at least a little bit of rope. But if he doesn't perform, there are going to be a million questions. We all know where the Flyers' takes are going to go, right? They're not going to be a very good team, or at least they shouldn't be. And if they are a good team, they should start to sell off parts to make themselves actively worse. But if they don't, right, like if the Flyers are a pretty bad team and Michkov isn't putting up any points and you get like 10 games into the season, he's got 1 goal and like 2 assists, you're going to get a lot of media people starting to write up was it a mistake to bring him over this early? Is he ready? Should he go to the AHL? If he does, is CSKA Moscow, are they going to try to like get him back? Which they can't, but like, would they try? All those things. Like there's a way that it could get really ugly really fast. I don't think it will, and I ultimately think that he's going to be a very good player for this team. So I don't want to like sound off all the alarm bells. I know that it probably sounds like I'm sounding some alarm bells, but I'm not, I promise. My general concern here is that so much of this rides on Michkov not just being a good rookie, but being a potential transcendent rookie. That's what the expectation is. The way that the team has talked about him, the way that the team has thrown out this idea of what he could be, even Tortorella calling him the Mad Russian and kind of putting some pressure around him there. He's got to perform, and he's young, and he's not exactly big, and that's what concerns me. But boy, there's going to be a lot of excitement around him. And when the Flyers go to camp, there is going to be an absolute chaotic atmosphere. Like, I think that last year, camp was well attended. This is going to be at another level. I actually won't be surprised. I haven't talked to anybody, but I will. After I do this show, I'll send off some texts. I won't be surprised if one of their practices, one of their training camp practices, the Flyers, that they don't move it over to Wells Fargo Center. I think that's how many people are going to want to watch Matvei Michkov. Because the fan base as a whole hasn't had a guy to look forward to watching play as much as they have this kid. I'm going to go over to the comments real quick because there's a lot. We got a lot of people talking about Michkov. A lot of people. Holy shamoly. All right, here we go. Let's get to some of these. BJ thinks that I should be at Philly International to see Michkov getting off the plane. I've been told, I've heard, there have been rumblings that he's not flying into Philly International. So John Clark shouldn't go there. Is what I've heard. Sean hopes that they've brought over his mother and brother too. You talk about the culture shock, the pressure, the excitement might be more than a 19-year-old can handle. And I think that's fair. We talked about Kolosov last week. 19-year-old kid. Now, the one thing that he does have going for him is Fedotov is here. They both speak Russian. They both have played in the KHL. They have more things that they can likely connect over than like when Kolosov came over, went to the Phantoms, and had no one to connect with. A little bit different. BJ says, if Quitter Gauthier, shop.sillygoalie.com, if Quitter wins the Calder over Michkov, should Briere be fired? I'll hang up and listen. I love that. If Quitter Gauthier somehow wins the Calder this year, yeah, like there are going to be a lot of pissed off fans. A lot. Trying to think of the right way to put this. I don't think that Cutter Gauthier is going to be some transcendent talent. I think that Cutter Gauthier is going to be a better player than Jamie Drysdale. I think he's going to be a more impactful player than Jamie Drysdale. And I don't think the Flyers got the better end of that deal. But the guy didn't want to play here. The guy didn't want to talk to John LeClaire. He didn't want to talk to Patrick Sharp. Was he looking for a guaranteed spot on the team? And Tortorella and Briere and Jonesy said no. That seems to be the prevailing wisdom right now. Is it that a certain guy, Kevin Hayes, may have told him some things about how shitty it is to play for Torts, or had some bad things to say about the organization? Entirely possible. Do we know that for a fact? No. Do we know that the way that people talk about their workplace and about teams that they've played for before? Yes. Is Kevin Hayes a particularly well thought of guy for a locker room or for the culture of a team? No. He wasn't here. He got traded. They actually ate money to deal him to Pittsburgh this year. So his last team also didn't seem to think much of him. The teams that he played for before he came to the Flyers didn't actively try to make a significant pitch to bring him back after he hit free agency and ended up with the Flyers. I digress. Sean C. notes that last year, Michkov took a picture at the Statue of Liberty that was also captioned, "What's next?" We all know that Skate Zone was next in that regard. That is true. Let's see. I'll go to the CMAX says that he landed in New York City at 5:30, according to Flyers TLY. I don't know if that's true or not. We'll just throw that out. Speculation. Did he land in New York? I would think that if you were going to fly from Russia, you'd probably fly into JFK. That's just my thought. Better flights. Better international flights, probably. Landros asks, Michkov over Lawton and Paling? Yes. Spiraler out thanks me for the different topics, which we're going to get to more. And don't forget, there's going to be a non-sports topic later in the show. Prepare yourselves. Gird your loins. Let's see. Sean says, I'd like to find out if the amount of season tickets sold since the smoke started to rise about this have risen since the smoke started to rise about this in May. The emails I got talked about waiting lists. I think that there has been a legitimate excitement over Michkov coming over. And I think the second that it became apparent that he was going to play this year, yeah, a lot of the people, I would think that a lot of lapsed fans and a lot of people that had walked away from their season tickets may have come back specifically to watch him play. Again, there's a lot of excitement. Landros says that the Flyers have to hope that Briere does his job and surrounds him with good talent, which is true. Andrew Fawcett doesn't think that Michkov is going to flop. He oozes confidence, seems to have a ton of swagger. Sean thinks that if Michkov doesn't live up to expectations, it would set the Flyers back a decade. But given what we've seen the last 15 years as Flyer fans, would it be entirely shocking if he is? I don't think he's going to be a mess. I really don't. Truly. Let's see. A lot of people saying about being positive or not. C-Mac dropping some stats here that he scored 2.3 points per game in the MHL. Demidov only 0.8. It's funny because if you go back to some of the issues abroad, there was a thought that Demidov had outplayed Michkov at the international level, at the club level. But I think Demidov's going to be a really good player. And I think that, like, given where Montreal is, Demidov might even have a bigger role than what Michkov is going to have here. I wouldn't be totally surprised if Demidov has more points by the end of the year than Michkov does. All that said, I'm just very interested to see how the city's going to handle this because I don't know. Seth checks in on YouTube and says that Michkov is legit. And let's see. I think we're good there. Seth also goes to this. How many points does Demidov have in the KHL? The answer is 0. The answer is 0. That is fair. It's fine. Landros. Oh, Landros throwing out like an absolute awful scenario. What if he got here and decided he didn't want to play in Philly? Then I think Briere might want to go back into hockey retirement. Listen, if after everything that has gone into bringing Matvei Michkov over, if after all of that, if he lands here and ultimately chooses like not to play here or says like, I don't want to be here, trade request, doesn't answer the phone, pulls a quit or Gauthier, we have a lot of fucking questions. All right, that happens. If Michkov comes over, gets to experience what it's like to be here, to be around these fans, to be around this team, the coach, everything. If he comes over and is like, niet, move the team. Just abolish the team. Send them to Arizona. Because at that point, something will have been so unbelievably rotten. All that's to say, that is not what's happening here. Not what's happening. Frankie Fasthands, who typically jumps into comment sections and then he really doesn't like Briere. I'm pretty sure that Frankie Fasthands is actually Chuck Fletcher. But Frankie says the Flyers got fleeced, and instead of playing Gauthier, we watched Lawton. That's fair. I still don't know why Scott Lawton's here. No one can give me a good answer. Good reason. Who knows? I do think that they were up against it. This is the last thing on the Flyers before we move on. But Frankie throws out this idea that the Flyers could have gotten a much better return for Gauthier than Drysdale. The one thing that I'll argue about that, and the one thing that I'm iffy on, the reason the Flyers made the deal when they did is because the word, I think, was starting to get out that Gauthier didn't want to play in Philly. And the Flyers, in going through this whole thing, didn't want to look bad. They made the case that they thought that part of their calculus and all of things falling apart was that they didn't want to drag the kid publicly for not wanting to play here. If we're being honest, the Flyers didn't want to look like a second or third rate organization by having this like young prospect say that he doesn't want to play here. This is where I honestly think things went really bad. Okay. And we're not going to know until somebody talks directly to the guy, probably off the record, and it just kind of begins to permeate and everybody gets their, informed speculation. Here's what I think happened. I think that after the Flyers drafted Gauthier, the signal had been given that they were going to do some form of a rebuild. He wanted to go, I think there's a chance he wanted to jump from college. I don't think that he wanted to jump from college at the start of last season. I think that it was more of a, if I go back to college, I want to be able to finish the year with the team. I think he wanted the same exact plan that he ended up getting from the Ducks. Like, show a commitment to me that if my season ends and there's only 3 or 4 games left in the year, that you guys will bring me up and I'll play for the Flyers. I don't think he wanted to play for the Phantoms. I think that he thought of himself highly enough, and maybe it was an inflated ego, but I don't think he wanted to play for the Phantoms. I think he said, I'm a high enough draft pick. When Fletcher drafted him, the idea was probably that he was going to be a centerpiece of what the team was going to do moving forward. Fletcher goes. Hayes gets dissed by the coach, gets kind of scapegoated, although I don't think it was, but maybe Hayes felt like he was scapegoated by the organization. And that since they had contact and since they're human beings and human beings talk about how they feel about their employers and all those things, that there were some negative feelings out there. The guy who drafted him was fired. Briere maybe comes in, and Tortorella I still think has way too much say on things and probably has way too much influence. But perhaps the message got across to him that, like, no, if there's 3 or 4 games left in the season, we're not going to waste a year of your ELC. That's bad business. But the next year you'll have the opportunity to compete for a spot at camp. I think that's where it went bad. Truly. I think it was over a year ago that things soured in a real meaningful way. Because if you remember last summer, there was the talk about, like, why didn't he show up to development camp? Or, like, why wouldn't he have at least been in training camp and you could have had him playing a bit and then he could have gone back to college? Like, there was none of that. And it was essentially that, like, he wanted to kind of rest up because he had been playing internationally and he had been playing, preparing for the college season and all that. I just think that this went really bad, like, over a year ago. And I think that the Flyers did screw it up. Like, I think that somewhere along the way, whether it was this version of the front office or whether it was the past iteration, like, somewhere along the way, the guy went from saying that he really wanted to play for the Flyers to actively doing anything and everything in his power to not playing for them. Like, something went wrong. And I don't think it was just the player who, like, woke up one day and had an epiphany that he hates the idea of playing for Philadelphia. I don't think that he was lying about wanting to play for the Flyers. I think something went sideways along the way. And again, we will not know what it is. Because believe me, on the Flyers side of things, I have asked. Anthony has asked. Bundy has asked. You get 5 different stories from 5 different people. And no one, I think, really does know. But I'm pretty sure if you start to, like, put enough of the pieces together, you can just figure out that, like, he probably wanted to be shown a commitment that he was going to play here and be a significant part of it. And I kind of think that the coach probably said pound sand. You don't just get a spot, you earn a spot. Probably didn't go well. And yes, you can sit back and have the conversation about whether or not athletes should be able to dictate things like that. And yes, you could make the case that if that is what happened, that a coach who won a Stanley Cup 2 decades ago should have or has more gravitas and should be able to kind of say those things. It ended up costing you a prospect that I think is actually going to be a very good player in the league. And you traded him for a defenseman who, while he can be dynamic and helpful on the power play, isn't a number 1 defenseman, isn't going to develop into being a number 1 defenseman. And oh, by the way, has had significant shoulder injuries that have now cost him significant time with both the Flyers and the Ducks. I digress. We'll litigate this more as the hockey season rolls around. Okay. Peter asks, do I get the NHL package to watch the Flyers or continue to listen to their games on Sirius? Live in the Outer Banks. Peter, love the Outer Banks. I don't know. I think it'll be worth watching just to get to watch Michkov. Landros asks, would the word getting out have really hurt his value? I think it would, because it would have totally leveraged. It would have taken any leverage that the Flyers thought they had away. If it's known that a guy wants out, yes, it could lead more teams to put together a package, but then it's also like, well, they're going to have to take some kind of below market value offer because the guy doesn't want to play there. That's where I'm at. I could be wrong. I don't think I am, but maybe. Let's see.
There are a lot more things about that. Let's see if there's anything else. Sean thinks that Gauthier wants and wanted to get to free agency faster to get a big payday, and noted that Anaheim burned an entire year from one game, which is true. Not great. A lot of people don't like him. We're going through this whole thing over here. Okay. I think we're good. We'll stop on the Flyers talk for there. Okay. Let's get back to, I think there was one other Philly sports point, and then the non-sports take. Really quick, Phillies. Keep coming back to this idea of if they have to make a trade before the deadline. And we'll get into this more on Friday. I think that you've now seen enough that while I have kind of gone on record and said that I think that Alvarado can be a closer and should be given the ability to be the closer for this team, I do think that you've now seen enough that there's a question of whether or not, I don't know if it's necessarily that he can't be your closer, but like you probably do need another guy who can pitch in high-pressure situations late in games. Oakland's closer's been thrown out there. There have been a few other names. There was a report yesterday from Nightingale that 3 of the biggest outfield names had already been ruled out by the Phillies. So that's kind of out there as well. We're, just over a week or so away from where things really do get intense. We'll talk about it more on Friday about potential targets for the Phillies. I didn't hit the panic button after the A's series. Truly, like, you're going to lose series to bad teams. It's normal. There's nothing to like really panic about. I'm just taking a look at, the Phillies are in this weird spot where you want to hope that they haven't begun to believe their own hype, but they haven't looked the sharpest over their last few series. Like, going into Pittsburgh and losing 2 of 3 was not a great look. That to me was at least slightly concerning. The A's series was weird, but you can kind of write it off a little bit. Coming out against the Pirates and not looking sharp is honestly a concern. And last night, I think everybody in this area was worried about like what Ranger Suarez was going to look like, because there had been a couple of starts of late where it looked like he was trying to pitch through something. And there was a legitimate concern of like, can he still perform not at the sort of quasi Cy Young caliber guy that he was through his like first 9 or 10 starts. It was more of a, are we going to legitimately watch the bottom fall out on the guy? The one positive that you can take away from a 7-2 loss to the Twins on Monday night is that Suarez was actually pretty good, right? 3 runs allowed over 5 1/3 innings. It's not Cy Young stuff, but it's not a bad start. Not bad in the least bit. That to me is at least a somewhat intriguing sign and a somewhat positive sign. Yes, you lost the game, but we have to feel good about the fact that Suarez looked pretty good doing it. Andrew Fawcett says, Alvarado's a good closer, but not a great closer. And also notes that he thinks that this is just the All-Star game hangover. Could be right. Totally could be right. Sean thinks that the Phillies need an outfield bat. They had the opportunity after opportunity to put the Pirates away on Friday. What happened against the Astros and D-backs happened again. Cold bats everywhere. It's a concern. I just don't know what they're going to... The thing that you keep coming back to is this idea that the Phillies have 2 untouchables, and that no matter what, they're not going to move them. I said this a while ago, and I will repeat it again. I'll reiterate it. The Phillies are in a position where they can win the World Series this year. But I do think that now you're starting to see that it is not a perfect team. It is a great team. It is not an all-time team. There are still some pieces they could add and give themselves a more legitimate chance to win the World Series. If they don't address, let's say, the back end of the bullpen, or like, let's say closer. Let's say that you're of the camp that Alvarado can't be your closer going into a postseason run. Fine. Like, if that's your position, you can hang on to it. If they don't address the bullpen, right? Like somebody who can pitch in high pressure situations, if they don't address it, they will reduce their chance of making it to the World Series and winning it. If they continue to kind of do this hodgepodge outfield where all the bats go cold at the same time, they are legitimately hurting their chance of making it to the World Series and ultimately winning it. So that, my friends, is something they need to figure out. Truly. There are a couple of positions they could add to. This is the one time where I say, if you're getting a legitimate player who is star quality or could develop into being a star and it costs you a painter, right? One of your top 2 prospects, this is the time that I say, yeah, it's okay. You make the move. Because you don't know if you're going to be able to put together a team that can do what this team is doing this season, that has looked as good and dominant at times as this team has. This is the kind of season you always try to build towards. It's right in front of you. The question is whether Dave Dombrowski and company will actually do what is needed to take this team and get them over the hump. All right, now I want to get to the non-sports point because we are getting late in the show, and it's something that we touched on Friday. And it's funny because I threw it out there and I was not really concerned. I find myself in this place now, and I said this on Friday, where we are in the final months leading up to an election. And this is where I get very excited, right? Because as a moderate and as somebody who doesn't really particularly care for the crazies here and the crazies there and the crazies everywhere, I just enjoy watching the chaos. I do, truly. And I said on Friday that hey, you're really close to potentially having something neat happen, an open convention. And I was very excited. I was like, on Friday, those of you who watched and who listened, you know that I was like, hey, this is the thing that everybody has always wanted. If you ever care about politics, or if you're one of the crazies like me who get close to an election, says,
I'm all in. I'm going to start to break down everything there is to know about these candidates.
the idea of an open convention is awesome, right? I'm listening to enough political podcasts now. I don't know why. I'm rotting my brain, but I'm doing it because I'm so interested in the possibility of an open convention. I was interested in the possibility last year going into the primary cycle where it was all right, were Trump's legal troubles going to potentially cause him to step out of the race? And that you were going to see one of the people who are running, a DeSantis or a Haley or a Ramaswamy or any of the other people. What the hell is that? Burgum. I was interested to see, was Trump going to have to step out last fall? Was I going to have a Rubio come back in? Chris Christie was in. So I was interested because I just thought that was wild to watch. And then as it became clear Trump wasn't going to debate any of the other Republicans, I was like, all right, well, that kind of takes a lot of the fun out of it, right? Because in fairness, you would kind of want to see the person who was the presumptive favorite, right, in Trump, debate the other people because that's just normal. That's what you do. But he knew he didn't have to, and none of the other people were able to even take him big enough or make a big enough dent or impact that Trump ever felt compelled to debate. And so the possibility of oh, cool, a legitimately competitive Republican primary went by the wayside. And then it was kind of the kids' table, right? It was there and I paid attention to it, but I wasn't nearly as excited. And while all that was happening, there were the murmurs of hey, what happens if the Democrats get to a point where Biden really does start to slip and does start to struggle? He isn't really facing any real competition as the incumbent. We talked about this on Friday. Historically, you don't really face a lot of competition in a primary cycle as the incumbent. So that was normal. But the question was what happens if he does start to slip? And will all the things that the Democrats thought were going to happen to the Republicans actually happen the other way? And then it started to look like it was going to. Then there was an assassination attempt, and you go, oh my God, an assassination attempt, the dude's poll numbers are going to skyrocket. And apparently, they kind of did, or they did enough that over the weekend, and not last week really, but over the weekend, the internal pressure and perhaps the bubble that had been built around President Biden kind of got penetrated a little bit, and that there were some internal polls that were showing that he was behind 6-7 points in battleground states, and that there were states that he was expected to win by big margins, that either he was winning by very small margins or had actually gone the other way. And that potentially might have been the thing that led him to ultimately decide to not resign. He's not going to resign, but to bow out of this entire political process of going for re-election. Now, there are a lot of questions, right? Like, the second that this all happened, I was at the Philadelphia Museum of Art with my family, and I see this notification come across my phone that he's saying he's not running for office. Now, as we all know, I happen to kind of live on Twitter, or at least like I'm plugged into the matrix enough that like news breaks, I'm on top of it. I spent the next 45 minutes at the museum, not on my phone, but like walking around, looking at the art, watching as different people started finding out the news. And it was pretty much like all of the other younger people at the museum were like almost immediately like, oh shit, like Biden dropped out. What does that mean? By the 45-minute mark, I was like watching like 55 and 65-year-old people start to kind of like point out to each other. It was really funny. We were in the, I don't know what the room was exactly, but the entire exhibit's like just black and white art. And I hear this one guy and he goes, my sister just texted me. President Biden dropped out. And some guy goes, what? So it was like an old man moment. And I legitimately started cackling. People probably thought I was insane. But it was just funny to me to like watch as news kind of trickled out over that 45 minutes or so. Anyway, it looks like the open convention's dead. I got so excited. I was like, yo, this is legit, because I read the statement. And in the statement, he thanks Vice President Harris for all of the great work, yada, yada, yada. There's no endorsement. And I go, oh my God, open convention. I'm like, so then I, as a crazy person and somebody who like enjoys doing the show and enjoys doing content, I'm like, yo, when we get home, I kind of have to do like an emergency version of either like this show, or I make like a different playlist on the YouTube channel that's specifically just for the political talk, so that if anybody who's like, you know, really triggered by the idea of like somebody trying to be rational with their takes about what's happening in the election season, they don't have to deal with it. So I'm starting to go through it. And then like a half hour later, there's the tweet from Joe Biden's Twitter account. I think it was the Joe Biden account, not the President Biden account. And by the way, I call Biden and Trump Biden and Trump. It's not because I'm being disrespectful. It's because those are their names. That's what I do. I will call Harris Harris. I won't call her Vice President Harris because I shorten things. I made the thumbnail for this episode, by the way. This took me like way too long last night because I was like, I don't want somebody to think that I'm being preferential in the kind of picture that I used of Trump and Harris. I don't want somebody to be like, oh my God, you picked such a nice picture of that person, but such a shady picture of this one. I tried. I legitimately tried to find as nice of a picture of both of them as I can. I found them both fucking waving, okay? I did my best. Okay, I digress. So I'm all excited. I'm like, yo, he didn't endorse. Open convention! Woo! And then what happens? It's dead, because a half hour later, the tweet comes out that Biden is endorsing Harris. And then my brain goes, hold on a second. I could be crazy. I may be. I go, why didn't you just endorse her in the letter? Because it would seem that would be the thing to do, right? If you're not going to do a video, if you're not going to address the nation, my thought was, you're outlining, I'm proud of all the things that we did. I'm really grateful for my vice president for all the work that she did in helping me achieve this. Thank you to all the American people. And I hope that you will support her going forward to continue our agenda, to continue our initiatives, yada, 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 where it's, I'm grateful. Here's what we've done. Here's what we've accomplished. I'm grateful to her. And now here is how we lead forward. And it didn't happen. So in my mind, I went, oh shit. Does he not want to endorse her? He didn't do it in the letter. And then there's a tweet a half hour later, and I'm like, that seems weird. So I posited that, and I put it on Twitter, and I had quite the mixed message, right? Because like a week and a half ago when the assassination attempt happened, I noted that I thought it was kind of sad that so many people were joking about the assassination attempt, other than like the legitimate crazy people who are like, shouldn't have missed. I thought that was disgusting. Whether you like somebody or not, I think it's disgusting to say stuff like that. And I was like, there was a guy who died. Like there was an actual guy who was shielding his wife and daughter, and he died. He was killed, and I don't think it's exactly like the best time to make jokes about an assassination attempt with that in mind. And then my tweet apparently wasn't conservative enough because there were people who DM'd me and a few who replied to the tweet who were essentially like, well, the president was attempted to be assassinated. Why didn't you mention that? I'm like, well, Jesus, like, can we have a moment where we don't have to like trigger somebody, right? Bad choice of words, where we don't have to offend somebody. So then I put this tweet out over the weekend, and I'm like, does anybody think it's weird that the endorsement came a half hour after the letter? Like that to me just seems weird. And there are some people who are like, that's kind of weird. kind of make you think. And then there were a bunch of people who were like, no, they're two totally different things, which I actually respect that opinion. If that's where you're at, where you're like, he wanted to kind of thank everybody and, like kind of have his like swan song letter, and then he was going to do a separate thing. Maybe. It's entirely possible. But what I did was I reached out to some people because I'm insane. Reached out to some people, and I heard through some intermediaries of people who may or may not have some relationships with some people who would know a few things on the Democratic side of things. They thought it was weird. Not everybody, but there were people who were at least tangentially affiliated with the national entity who thought it was a very strange choice to not endorse within that letter. So I might be crazy, but there are people who are much more involved on the day-to-day than I am who thought it was a really weird choice to not include an endorsement in that letter, which I felt vindicated in that moment. I'm like, all right, well, cool. I might be crazy, but I'm not that crazy. All right, so that is what it is. That part happened. Some people got upset on Twitter. This is normal. I'm disappointed that there's not going to be an open convention. I was truly disappointed that it doesn't look like some of the governors that you would have thought would have challenged for that spot immediately went and endorsed. I thought it was interesting to see that like the Clintons and the Obamas took very different paths in terms of like, were they going to endorse or were they not going to endorse? And like, what could that have meant for like behind the scenes? I think all these things are fascinating. Okay. It looks like what you're going to have is a Trump versus Harris showdown. And I said on Friday that the thing that's interesting, if you're from this area, is what does that mean with Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania? Because one would think that he could be a name that would certainly be of interest. Pennsylvania is a very important state. Could potentially go either way. Shapiro is a popular governor in Pennsylvania, not in all of Pennsylvania. I can hear the people where I grew up screaming right now through the screen at me that they hate him. But there are a lot of people who think of Shapiro in a pretty positive way. So if you're Harris and you're looking for somebody who obviously looks different, white guy, and you're looking for somebody who would capture the potential battleground state of Pennsylvania, it's a good pick. Gretchen Whitmer wasn't going to happen. They weren't going to run two women on the ticket. To anybody who's offended by the notion that a political party in the year 2024 would see a lot of risk and potentially presenting a two-woman ticket to the United States of America where on any given day you will see a million tweets pointing out misogyny, you cannot be surprised that that wasn't going to happen. Okay. Gavin Newsom, there are a lot of questions. There were a lot of people who thought that he might actually try to challenge for it. I believe he endorsed Harris. Whitmer endorsed Harris. Shapiro endorsed Harris. If all of the top governors, or many of those top governors, have endorsed Harris, there is nothing to run on. So then it's a question of, what do you do? Is California going to allow, or is California's Governor Newsom going to want to ride shotgun with Harris when there's a potential that if she loses, he could run again in 2028? I don't think so. And that's actually where I land on Shapiro. And I tweeted this out too, that I think that there's like a 0% chance that he ends up being the pick at VP. And I had somebody who was like, I guess somewhat local to where I am, was like, you can't say that there's 0 chance because he's one of the people who was shortlisted. He's one of the people that she was going to talk to. 0% chance doesn't mean, at least in the way that I meant the tweet to frame, isn't that there's no chance she's going to look at him as a candidate. It's that I don't think he wants to be the vice president because I think he sees what a lot of people see. And I actually pulled stats on it because I was interested in, because again, I'm kind of insane. I went back to this. There are going to be a lot of clips going back and forth between Harris and Biden and Vance and whoever she picks as her vice president and all that. And there are going to be a lot of people who are going to pick and choose what they decide is essentially the knockout blow to the other candidate. Fine. When I look at Shapiro, I say there's no chance that he's going to want to be vice president. I'm actually going to pull up the tweet because I stand by what I tweeted, damn it. And I actually found some stats, and I felt pretty proud of doing a little bit of work and finding some stats. There are 2 reasons that I think Shapiro's not going to want to be vice president. And it's not what CNN said, which we might get to in a second. So I put out 0% chance, there's 0 chance Josh Shapiro will be the VP candidate. He was eyeing 2028 before this. If Harris wins, he'll be young enough to run in 2032. if she loses, 2028 is in play. No one with serious presidential aspirations wants to be hotshotted into the vice president role months before the election. I stand by that. I think that Whitmer knew that if she wanted to run in 2028, if Harris loses, it's open. I think Newsom's the same way, and I honestly think Shapiro's the same way. And even if Harris wins, there's no guarantee that she wins re-election. You're back in it at 2020 or 2032. That's where I'm at. That's just where I stand. So then I started pulling some stats, because this is what I do, right? I think it was on this tweet. I have to look and see. Maybe it wasn't this one. It was another one. I'll find it in a second. I went back and I looked to see how many losing vice presidential candidates have gone on to win the presidency. And that's where it got really interesting. In the history of these United States, only 2 people in the history of the country have lost as a vice presidential candidate and gone on to become president of the United States. 2. John Tyler, who actually was never elected. John Tyler took over for William Harrison, right? William Harrison. How do you praise that guy? Was dead in 30 days. Animaniacs song. Harrison dies 30 days into his tenure as president. Tyler takes over. It becomes like a big thing. I actually learned a lot in reading about Tyler and how he took over and the precedent that it set. But John Tyler was never actually elected. Ended up kind of getting thrown out of his own party. I think it was the Whig Party. Got thrown out of them. Couldn't really run for another party. Nobody really wanted him, and that was the end. So John Tyler didn't even lose for VP and then go on to run for election as a president. He took over for a president who died in office, served his term, and then he was ousted. FDR is really the only person to be VP who then eventually ran for president and won. So if you're a Shapiro or if you're a Newsom or a Whitmer or whoever, if you think that there's a chance that even with the excitement that might be around Harris right now, if you look at it and you say, hey, a few months from now, I think there is still a pretty decent chance she loses, historically, that bump, that national profile bump that some people wanted to argue in that original tweet, it doesn't exist. It's not real. If you are tied to a losing ticket, one person has actually been elected to be president after that in the history of the country. Now, somebody brought up, what about the inverse? What about somebody who ends up being the vice president on a winning ticket? Then what happens? 15 vice presidents have gone on to be president. 5, however, took over for either a president dying in office by illness, Harrison, and then there were 4 others who were assassinated: Lincoln, Garfield, McKinley, and JFK. Okay? So there are 15. You can rule out, I believe, of the assassinations, I think only 1 of those people ran for president and was elected after that. That might be where I'm a little bit wrong. But if you win as the VP candidate, 15 people have eventually taken over as president at some point through illness, assassination, or by being elected. But if you lose, it's about as toxic as it can be. There is an inherent kind of I don't want to say stink, but it is sort of. It's the stench of failure. It's the stench of a loss. If you are the VP candidate and you lose, the national profile bump historically hasn't mattered. You don't become president. So I come back to this. If you're Shapiro, you're 51. That is not the youngest of young. You're not as young as a J.D. Vance, but you're not old. And if you're Shapiro, you serve another term as governor. You get to a point where you've built up enough of a profile where even some of your biggest critics might start to warm up to you in Pennsylvania. Though admittedly, there are people on both sides who are very far either side and will never consider that. But the moderate middle, he might even get more popular over another term. And if Harris loses in 2028, I would argue he is the favorite to get the nomination for the Democrats. If I were Shapiro, I would not want to be on this ticket. You want to have a conversation about potentially getting named to a cabinet spot if Harris wins? Totally different story. But if it were me, if I were him, I wouldn't want to be on that ticket at all. I think there's way too much risk. And I think he's smart enough to know that it's not great. I don't know if you want to be on that ticket. By the way, a lot of excitement came out over the weekend about Harris replacing Biden. And the podcasts that I listened to, many of those podcasts where there had been kind of like a certain kind of sadness and anger that Biden hadn't stepped down by then, they are all now singing the praises of Harris. And now they've kind of done this revisionist history thing where, like, while they were actively calling for him to resign last week, now it was this heroic act to step down. I'm not going to dive into that. I just think that the hypocrisy is like on full display. To me, it's just kind of weird. I'm going to go to the comments here. I'm going to try to find as many of the comments that aren't too polarizing. We'll bring those up and then we're going to call it a day. Andrew Fawcett thought that Obama's lack of endorsement was very telling. There are a lot of people who still, for whatever reason, are like, they're going to get to the DNC. They're going to get to the convention. And Michelle Obama's going to run. Everything that I have ever seen or heard from people who have covered Washington, who covered the Obamas, say that she never wanted to ever be involved in public service, ever be involved in politics, actively hated the fact that her husband was part of it. I would not expect her to run for president. There was, I saw the Alex Jones conspiracy on Twitter. This is from, you start to click around on X looking for like political news and you start to get some like really wild, crazy takes. But I saw an Alex Jones clip where he was saying that Hillary Clinton is going to run against Trump. I can't imagine that's the case, but boy, I saw that and chuckled for a second. Sean C. says, if Republicans were smart, they would take the clip of Tulsi Gabbard versus Harris at the debate and play it 50 million times until Election Day. That clip has been going around a lot, calling out her record on prison sentences, about keeping people in jail, to use them as like cheap labor, essentially. There have been a lot of clips going around. You may have traded away having two old guys going against each other for president. You have not traded away the Trump presidency from the Biden presidency, because you still have somebody who's been there as the right-hand woman through that entire presidency, for better or worse. For Democrats, they would argue it's a good thing. For Republicans, they'd argue it's a bad thing. This is why the duopoly, it's a problem. Anyway, Kevin at iRock Philly says the same thing that I do. Thinks that, says that some say Shapiro won't be interested because he thinks Kamala will lose and he'll want to make his own run. That is where I land. Peter thinks that governor of Kentucky will be the VP pick. That's Beshear. I think that it's more likely that Beshear would be the pick than Shapiro. If I had to like handicap it right now, I would say that Beshear is a very good candidate to be VP. And I think it probably makes sense for him to run. Let's see. Got people saying somebody's too far left, too far. Okay. This is an interesting point. And we might get to this at some point in future episodes leading up to the election. Trump picking Vance as VP is going to cost him the election. I said at the time, I didn't understand the pick. I did. I think I understood why they did it, but I didn't think it was necessarily the smartest pick at the time, given like what was being said publicly. Really quick. J.D. Vance has a really cool story, apparently. I didn't read his book. I didn't see the movie, in fairness. So I can't comment on either. I've seen a lot of people on both sides of the aisle saying that was a very good book. He has a lot of stuff that he can pull from. I think that was a pick on ideology, not necessarily on what was going to be either the uniting ticket or was going to be something that like you would try to go after being able to make more of like a mainstream appeal, if that makes sense. It felt like Vance was kind of the idea of like, if you elect Trump for 4 years, that Vance was going to be aligned on policy where like you would be setting him up to have an 8-year run after Trump. That like the ideology of what you're going for would be able to extend. Whereas like if you had made a boring pick like a Doug Burgum, who was a sitting governor who also had a lot of money, but was a sitting governor, that maybe is viewed as like more of a unifying pick because it's not as extreme in the minds of people who were like further on the left. I have to admit, like I thought that Vance was a strange pick in the moment. It felt like a pick that you make if you are 100% convinced that you're going to win, which in fairness, following an assassination attempt, you probably do feel like it's a foregone conclusion you're going to win. I do think that Biden stepping aside has now re-energized the other side, and maybe it's the only thing that could have gotten Democrats back into the race. It's interesting. You know, we always say like these are unprecedented times. I feel like that as somebody who's 33, all I've ever seen is unprecedented times. Seen a pandemic, seen 9/11, We never really got to live in the America that everybody kind of waxes poetic about. You know, if you're a millennial, there's a reason that we're jaded. And then all the boomers tell us that we're insane and lazy and stupid. Okay. Let me see if there's anything else that I can pull up here. There are some things that I just won't pull up, but if you want to read them in the comments, you can. I'm just a little bit iffy on bringing some of them up because I try to do as good of a job of like presenting the fair and balanced news here as we can. There are people who think that, you know, like I'll go with this. So Andrew says Harris has been complicit in a cover-up. This is going to be a talking point. Now, whether or not you believe that there was a cover-up of like how Biden is doing is up to you. There was one clip that came around through the news over the last few days that I still don't think anybody has actually gotten clarification on. Frank Biden, Joe Biden's brother, apparently told, I think it was ABC, somebody fact check me if I'm wrong, but the quote that was passed along on live TV was that Joe Biden's brother said, "We just want to enjoy the time we have left." And now, maybe it's because, like, I don't know how old Frank Biden is. Maybe it's just the idea that, like, hey, we're both old guys. You never know what's going to happen. But the way that was interpreted was like, holy shit, is he dying? Like, is like Joe Biden terminally ill? You obviously hope not. Like, I hope not. I don't want to see anybody die, right? Like, I don't like the idea of anybody getting... Listen, a lot of people don't like Trump. I think the people who like went out of their way to say it's a shame that the sniper missed, I think those people are fucked up in the head. I think that's like genuinely there's something wrong with you. And at the same time, I think that like if you took everything that's happened here with Biden stepping aside and like him having COVID and then like you heard that quote about like what his brother said about the time we have left, I think that if you're actively rooting for the guy to die, I think you're fucked in the head. Okay? So like this is where I say, as somebody who's in the middle, I watch the people lob the arrows over top. But I genuinely think that if your entire purpose in life is to sit back and wish death upon the person who represents the other political party, I think there's something wrong with you. I do. That's as extreme as I get. I just think that like you need therapy or you need like to touch grass or you need like a hug. Maybe I'm crazy. I don't think I am. But so anyway, I don't know what's happening. I don't think anybody does. The Democratic National Convention, though, is all of a sudden going to be the most intriguing watch on TV. Because we all, I think, are going to expect that Kamala Harris is going to be essentially like given the baton, right? Which she said that she wants to earn the nomination, but it does seem like it's more of a coronation than an open convention. And as disappointed as I am about there not being an open convention, I have to respect the fact that, like, all right, if everybody gets behind you and they like, then all right, like, go out, do your best. Harris, do your best. Trump, do your best. Vance, do your best. And then whoever Harris picks, like, you go do your best. And then we'll all see how it plays out in November. We'll talk about things on this show, though. So just, you know, prepare yourselves. Put it at the very end of the episode so the people who don't like the politics talk, they can drop off. But I'm just interested, truly. There were some other things. We'll have to come back to it. Like there are some other things that came out this weekend, like RFK Jr. putting out, like him doing his own press conference where like he kind of shredded people on both sides and said that like he thinks he's the one who could beat Trump and that like he doesn't want to run as a Democrat, but if they make an offer that he would be open to having a conversation. Like there's just a lot of stuff going on. Just a lot going on. Let's see. I'm just looking to see if there's anything else. This is actually a good question from Sean. What happened behind the scenes? AOC went on Instagram Live over the weekend and said that the media is crazy to think the Democratic Party would be so united behind Harris. 36 hours later, she glowingly endorses her. I have no clue. There is something to be said for like going back and checking out where people were at. The one thing I'll give, I guess, AOC credit for is that she said something to the effect of an open convention opens you up to so many legal challenges just because of like having to replace the candidate on the ballot. And like you could potentially be putting certain states in the court's hands. And like how as a Democrat, if you look at how the Supreme Court and everything has ruled of late, that might not be good for you. Right? Like all those things. I don't know. It's weird because it seems to me that there was a thought that you would probably have at least one of the governors step up and take on Harris so that there was at least a choice. And that somewhere over the weekend, there was an edict passed down that like everybody is backing Harris together, unified front, and that like that is what they need to do. I have no idea what happened or what changed. I do think it's interesting. Again, as a neutral observer, I find all of this fascinating. Maybe you do too, or not. I don't know. Let me see if there's anything else I want to pull up here. I don't think so. I think that we are in a good spot to end the show today. I want to thank everybody who joined the show live on YouTube, who joined live on X, who joined live on Facebook. But I love and appreciate all of you who go back and watch after the fact. Maybe you're working in the morning. Maybe you're still asleep in the morning. Maybe you're at school or something in the morning. I have no idea. But I see a lot of people who, like, after the episode goes out, the YouTube number jumps, the number on X jumps, and I appreciate it. Now, you can find this show, for those of you who are new, this is available over on the Russ Joy Show YouTube account. It's also available on the Joy Media LLC account, so you can go subscribe to either of those places. You can find the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon Music, wherever you get your podcasts. I'll be back on Friday, 8 a.m. sharp. I'm going to make sure I'm gonna have a chat. I have a chat with my wife and my kids. Got to go live right at 8 o'clock. I'm going to make sure all my tech is working the way it's supposed to, right on time. 8 o'clock, Friday morning. Be there, or you get your money back. But as I've reminded some of you before, you're not paying for any of this. So there's no money to get back. Big thank you to all the people who joined live. A big thank you for all the kind words. And please do exactly what Andrew says here. Smash that like button. Share the video. Subscribe. You sharing the show is more important than you can imagine. So please, like the video. If you don't have a YouTube account, create one. You don't have to post videos to it. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell to get notified whenever there's a new episode. So, I'm Russ Joy. This has been the Russ Joy Show. I will talk to all of you Friday at 8 a.m. Have a great rest of your week. Let's see what kind of chaos unfolds over the next few days in Philly sports and in politics. Until then, talk to you soon.